Alright, so I live in the Appalachian Mountains, and if you've heard anything about them, it's probably this.
The search area has expanded as the days stretch into a full week since the youngster was reported missing.
If you hear something in the woods, no you didn't.
No, you didn't. Keep walking. You do not want to be outside when the sun goes down.
Something very strange seems to be going on inside of national parks.
Lately I've seen these videos all over social media talking about the long history of people vanishing on the Appalachian Trail and in the mountain range that's named after, and what might be causing those disappearances. Secret National Park Service projects, feral cannibal people, Bigfoot, skinwalkers.
You're usually hunted for a long time by these creatures.
They're called devil monkeys.
Bigfoot is from the Pacific Northwest and skinwalkers are from the Southwest, but that's beside the point. These mountains have a rich history of folklore, and it can be really interesting to get into that, but these videos can often disrespect the people who have gone missing in these mountains and the people who live in them.
Details their experience with the mountain people.
Feral, rumored to be cannibalistic men that lived in East Tennessee in the woods.
Generations of people who have grown up living in these caves of national parks.
So naturally, I started reading, trying to figure out why people go missing in my backyard and what makes these mountains feel so strange and eerie. The science and history that I found along the way is frankly more interesting than any conspiracy theory, but it also completely changed the way that I see these mountains. I was left more aware of the dangers lurking in them, but also of their beauty and what sets them apart from any other mountain range on Earth. Most people think of the Appalachians as this area in the south, but they actually extend all the way up to this tiny island off the coast of Newfoundland called Belle Isle. You've probably heard that these mountains are some of the oldest on Earth. They started forming about 500 million with a B years ago. That's pre-Pangea, pre-dinosaur. Fish had just appeared. It started out with one tectonic plate sliding under another, forming massive stratovolcanoes, but those mountains were eventually eroded down into basically just gravel. Then 400 million years ago, those same two plates slammed back into each other, this time forming huge, jagged peaks. And then about 290 million years ago, Africa slammed into North America, shoving these mountains inland, rolling and folding them over each other, exposing rock hundreds of millions of years old to form one of the most geologically complex mountain ranges on Earth. Since then, wind, water, and ice have carved these mountains into what they are today, and they continue to do so. Let's start with wind. Just look at Mount Washington in New Hampshire, one of the coldest and windiest places on Earth. The weather station at the top has recorded a 28-foot snowpack, negative 47 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and a negative 108 degree Fahrenheit wind chill just a few months ago. At least 130 people have died on this mountain, and it's such a tough climb that it's used to train for Denali and even Everest. Needless to say, I think the weather out here gets a bit more intense than people give it credit for. Next, water. The southern Appalachian Mountains contain the rainiest places in the US outside of the Pacific Northwest, as much as 230 centimeters in some areas. Heavy rains have caused massive floods that cascaded through the mountains, carving deep gorges, and also allowed for the growth of a lush temperate rainforest containing thousands of species, many of them found nowhere else on Earth. And finally, ice. About 10,000 years ago, the northern Appalachians were buried under massive glaciers. As the glaciers advanced, plants and animals native to the north migrated south to escape extinction. When the glaciers retreated and the climate warmed, those species moved to higher elevations, looking for the colder conditions they were used to. A lot of species ended up stuck on mountaintops with no way of migrating elsewhere, evolving into a web of species found only here and some only on individual summits. Now you go up to the mountaintops here in the south and you'll find a landscape that feels a lot more like Canada. These are often described as biological islands, time capsules of a landscape that was widespread during the Ice Age. These mountains provided a habitat for huge groups of bison and elk, packs of wolves, mountain lions, and lynx, and flocks of birds like passenger pigeons, which were likely the most numerous bird on Earth, traveling in flocks numbering in the billions. And what's cool is that the ecology is wildly inconsistent. At the far north, you would find an Arctic tundra complete with caribou, Arctic foxes, polar bears, and this guy, the great auk. Basically a penguin. These mountains were also home to people, a diverse quilt of hundreds of indigenous cultures living in the valleys for thousands of years. The landscapes of the Appalachians are some of the most complex and biodiverse on Earth. And with that complexity comes interdependence. Upset the balance just a bit and things fall apart quickly. European settlers first arrived here in the late 1400s, but these mountains provided a huge barrier to expansion, and for the first couple centuries they didn't even try crossing over them. The first people to inhabit the higher elevations were actually indigenous groups, pushed out of the valleys by settlers and the diseases they brought, and forced to take refuge in the mountains. But in the 1700s, the East Coast started getting crowded, and settlers started to move inland, once again pushing indigenous groups out and into the plains to the west. The first explorers to cross the mountains describe an infinitely complex landscape of steep slopes choked with dense vegetation and days of darkness under the canopy above. Even Daniel Boone, who's like the Appalachian explorer guy, described the slopes as, quote, so wild and horrid that it is impossible to behold them without terror. When these settlers first arrived, the mountains were almost entirely covered by old-growth forest, containing trees over 8 feet wide and 260 feet tall. But in the 1800s, a timber industry exploded in the Appalachians, harvesting just about all of these forests. Logging companies scooped up huge amounts of land, getting absolutely loaded while paying people next to nothing to move into the mountains and clear that land. These loggers worked long hours exposed to the elements, surviving on rations, and packed in large groups into temporary shelters. And as the industry grew, railroads and burns to clear the land caused wildfires that engulfed thousands of square miles of forest.
This forest around me is one of the only old-growth forests left in the entire Appalachian mountain range, and one of the only places on this side of the country where you can come and find just like a really big old tree like this guy. Pretty much all of the area surrounding this forest was clear-cut, but the logging companies cutting it down went bankrupt before they could get to this spot at the bottom of the valley. And then a few years later, a wildfire blew through and knocked out a bunch of land, but also missed this spot. So out of pretty much sheer luck, we have this really cool little area where you can come and get kind of a glimpse into what most of this forest would have looked like a couple hundred years ago.
Logging, mining, and damming in the mountains drove many species to extinction, including the passenger pigeon and the great auk, and drove many others out of the region. Bison, salmon, elk, caribou, and polar bears, just to name a few. Big predators like bears and lynx had it particularly bad because people kind of just didn't like them and hunted them down for the hell of it. Industry, of course, came with pollution, which contaminated the waterways and even the air. At higher elevation, there's often this beautiful fog, but it's wildly acidic from sulfur and nitrogen emissions. Acid rain, fog, and snow have been a huge problem here, weakening the higher elevation ecosystems and cutting plant growth in half in some areas. European settlement also brought invasive parasites. All over the Appalachians, you'll see these ghost forests, skeletons of entire tree species wiped out by parasites. Just decades after they got huge, the logging and mining industries collapsed, leaving behind a ruined landscape and a population without work, forced to survive off of this steep, rocky terrain that wasn't really any good for farming. With no money and no good roads, these communities were pretty much trapped in the mountains. That isolation led to the development of a unique culture and folklore unlike anything else in the country. Combine that with the way that these mountains and their inhabitants have often been portrayed in movies, TV, and other media, and the cultural image of the Appalachians kind of starts to take shape. There's also just a spooky vibe here. Like, we know that the mountains are old, but you can also just feel it. The boulders, the twisted trees, the fog, it can be a bit eerie. It's honestly not that surprising that people think this is a creepy place where weird stuff just happens all the time. But it isn't. It's a place with a unique, and I'll be the first to admit, sometimes quite off-putting culture and centuries of folklore. But that doesn't mean there are cannibals or skinwalkers hiding in the caves, kidnapping unsuspecting hikers. The Appalachians have this reputation as spooky and haunted, but they also have a reputation as kind of the wimpy mountains on the other side of the country. But honestly, my biggest takeaway from making this video has been that these mountains are a lot more intense than people give them credit for. Sure, they're not as big as the Rockies or the Cascades, but this terrain is steep and overgrown, difficult to navigate, with weather that can go south really fast. You're probably familiar with the Appalachian Trail, which runs through a big stretch of these mountains. The AT is about 450 miles shorter than the Pacific Crest Trail out west, but it typically takes people a few weeks longer to complete. This terrain is just deceptively challenging to navigate. It was 400 years ago, and it still is today. It's easy to get lost or injured, and hard to get found. The dense forest and steep terrain make it difficult for search parties to cover ground, and nearly impossible for planes or helicopters to spot someone beneath the canopy below. Sure, these mountains aren't as large as others, but that doesn't mean they aren't just as dangerous. Just as this landscape continues to present plenty of threats and hazards today, it continues to face plenty of threats and hazards of its own. Mountaintop removal for mining has literally blown thousands of square miles of mountains to pieces. Fracking for natural gas here contaminates groundwater and rivers, and climate change is causing ecosystems to migrate to higher elevations, which isn't great for the ones that are already stuck on the tops of mountains, like the biological islands we talked about earlier. But a lot of things have actually been improving. As the forest that was cut down 200 years ago has grown back and been more carefully regulated, many of the species that went with it have been returning too. Moose, bald eagles, bears, hell yeah, who doesn't like bears? And other species have been deliberately reintroduced, like elk, many of which were imported from Wyoming. Honestly, the more I learn about these mountains, the more I appreciate them. As the home to some of the rarest and most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, as one of the planet's longest running projects, and as just a really beautiful place.
What the absolute fuck is it? I'm starting to regret that I stopped at this rest stop. And they say Bigfoot isn't real? I don't ever want to stick my arm out.
I used to do house calls in the hills of the Appalachian Mountains, primarily for people that lived like off the grid. They didn't have telephones, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no GPS. You use a map, you use the compass. And the company that I worked for doesn't exist anymore. I don't work for that company anymore. But all of the stories I have are very interesting. Based on true stories. Of course, I have to change some things because of anonymity, but when people say that there are strange things in the Appalachian Mountains, I didn't believe it until I actually worked in the Appalachian Mountains. Here's one of those events, for example. I was en route to a patient's home, and as I said, I have a lot of patients that are off the grid, or they live in very rural communities. So I'm driving down a road, and I make a hard turn onto like a side street, I suppose you would say. And there's a single car length bridge. This is important. And I go about 5 minutes past that bridge, and it takes me to another small road where there's a house. Okay, so obviously it didn't take me very long off of the main gravel road to get to this person's house. And like I said, I don't have a GPS, so I really have to pay attention to where I'm going, and how long I've been on this road, and like landmarks, so I can find my way back. It's the middle of the afternoon, and when I arrive on the property, there's a barn straight ahead at at the end of like this drive, and then the house is far set to like the left, and there's like a field in front of the house, right? But it looked like I was supposed to park in front of the barn. That's where the gravel thing ended, so I figured I'd park here and I'll walk to the house. I don't see any other houses around or anything, but I hear that there's people around because I hear like kids playing. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of nice. You know, it's a beautiful day outside. I heard someone call out to me. They said hello, and I, you know, am still getting stuff out of my car, and I say, hello, I'll be there, just, you know, give me 1 second, I'm getting my things out of the car. And then I turn, and there's like a car that looks like it's been parked there for a while, and I know this because there's like weeds and brush growing up around it. And there's a gentleman that's walking out from behind the car. Looks like he was tinkering on it or something. He was wearing like denim overalls. No shirt underneath. Nothing particularly interesting about this guy. And so I turned around and started heading to the house, and I don't see anyone, so I thought they must have said hello and then gone back inside. I don't know, maybe they're getting their medications ready, getting their paperwork ready for us to review it when I get in. And I knocked on the door, and the person comes and collects me, and she said, oh, I didn't see that you had arrived, you're a bit early. And I said, oh, am I? Sorry, thought I heard you call out to me. And she said no. And I was like, okay, fluke, whatever. So we're doing the visit, and we're almost done with the visit. It's still early afternoon. And I get to asking this person I always ask, who do you live with? And she had said, oh, you know, I live alone, and I own like 100 and some acres. And I was like, oh, so like nobody else lives on the property with you? And she says no. And I said, well, I like thought I heard kids playing outside, and I saw a man like doing something with that car out there. Like, does he work for you? And she looked at me and she said, it's out there. And I was like, the car? Yeah, it's out there. It's at this moment I realized that I don't think we're talking about the car. And she goes, you have to go. I'm like, I have to go. I'm like, you know, pardon me, but I'm not quite done yet. And she said, it's going to rain, and if it rains and that pass that you came through, that dirt road gets wet, you won't be able to leave. And I'm like, it's not going to rain, like it's a clear sky outside. She says, I'll fix you a sandwich. Things are happening quickly, like it's kind of bizarre. We go from having a nice visit and talking to, you need to leave now. And I'm still confused as hell, because she's telling me that she lives on a property where no one else is, and I just literally heard people outside and saw a guy on her property. So like, I'm not understanding what's going on. She's consistently saying like, you have to leave, it's going to rain, you're going to get stuck, you won't be able to leave. Okay, so she hands me a bag. She says there's a sandwich in it. It's like a mesh bag that you keep like potatoes or onions in. She just threw like a baggie in there. She said it was a sandwich. So I'm talking to her while she's making the sandwich, and she's telling me that I need to go and get back on the road. And I turn, and it's dark outside. And I don't mean storm cloud dark outside. I mean it's dark outside. It's the middle of the afternoon. And she hastily, I'd say hastily, walks me to the door from which I have come, opens the door, says goodbye, practically pushes me out and closes the door. Now I'm standing in the middle of the afternoon. That was a sunny afternoon, on this person's porch in the pitch black with a sandwich. I still don't quite understand the sandwich. What do you want me to do? You want me to bargain with Paranormal Patrick out here for my life? Exchange a sandwich for the skin that he wants to take off and wear like a glove? Not gonna lie, I'm tweaking out a little bit. I'm like, what is going on? Everything was fine. So, like I said, I have been in interesting situations before. I have no Wi-Fi. I cannot call anybody. My car is parked, remember, across the field next to the barn, past several cars that are parked on this property that I just saw someone walking by, and I see nobody now. So I do what anybody would do. I pretend that I'm walking on a target. I am unbothered. I keep a steady pace. I do not stop. I keep my head straight ahead to my car. And I can tell you clear as day, there is somebody walking. There's somebody walking parallel to me. And you can, like, I could feel it. Like, I could feel somebody looking at me. It gives me goosebumps. I don't know if you can see the goosebumps, but like I can still, oh yeah, you can. I can still remember like somebody's in this field with me. And how the hell is it this dark outside? I'm not gonna lie, I dropped the sandwich. I'm like, I don't care. I'm done. It gets quiet. From the point that I'm walking from the fields to my car, it is quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no nothing. But you know what I can hear? The sound of jeans. The sound that denim makes when someone's walking. At this point, I'm like, don't run. Don't run. Don't run. Just keep walking like you're walking out of Target, get to your car and leave. I get to my car, I get back on the road, I start driving, and I'm waiting to see this bridge that I came in on. Because remember, I told you I make note of landmarks, I know how long I've driven on this road because I need to get back to the main road, which means I need to remember how I've come. I'm driving on this road in the dark for like 20 minutes. And there is no main road in sight, and this is the only road that enters this property. Like, I couldn't have made a wrong turn. I'm driving down the road. Eventually I get to like this, I wouldn't say brick, it's like this stone underpass bridge thing. I drive under it. It's maybe a little tunnel. I drive under it. It's pitch black on the inside. I get to the other side. It's daytime. And I'm sitting in my car like shaking, trying to make sense of this. Like how is this possible? Like weather? No, weather does not explain it. She's like, it's going to rain. There was no rain, okay? That wasn't clouds. That was night, okay? That was night. That was pitch black, middle of the day. I've encountered some strange things on this job, but I can tell you that really felt like being hunted. That was an interesting feeling. And to this day, I still don't understand the sandwich. I don't understand why she was so insistent on making me leave with this sandwich, but it didn't come with me. I dropped it on the way to the car. I was like, absolutely not. This is just too weird. This whole thing is so weird. Now, like I said, I worked this area for quite some time. I kind of knew my way around. I kind of knew what roads were shooting off the main gravel road. I could find my way to different side streets, if you will. And this was the first time I had seen this patient. It was the first time I had been off this road with the bridge. And I actually went back that way to drive past it to see another patient again. And I could not, for the life of me, find this road. Like, it's like it wasn't there. There was like rock formation, like a part of the mountain that you would drive, you would turn around, and then it would give way to this little road that I got on. And I passed over this bridge and made it to this woman's property. And I never saw that road again. I know you probably think I'm absolutely crazy, but I never saw that road again. The Appalachian Mountains are not for the weak, y'all. I mean, I can't explain it. I know it's kind of an odd story. It's kind of anticlimactic. Nothing happened. But, like, I can't explain it. If you live in the Appalachian Mountains, have you ever heard of something like this happening before? Like, I know it sounds silly, but what do you mean the road's not there?
And I don't know, I feel like I need to go to a doctor, but like I'm constantly just like nauseous, and I don't really know why. Like, I have tried to like take medicine for it and stuff, but I don't know, it doesn't seem like it really does anything. And then
there was this man named Jim. Now, Jim grew up in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. And he said he was the oldest of 5 brothers and sisters. And they lived in this older home situated in the middle of the woods, surrounded by the mountains. Now, he said this one particular night, his father put him in charge of watching his brothers and sisters. And so his father left, and several hours had passed. Him and his brothers and sisters, they were playing a game of tag, running around the house, when all of a sudden they hear the doorbell ring. So they all go up to the front door. They look out the window. There's nobody out there. So they're like, who was that? So they go back to playing. And after about 15-20 minutes, once again, they hear the doorbell. They go and look out the window. there's no one there. So they go back to playing again, and once again, the doorbell rings. So this time, Jim goes to the door, and he opens it, and he goes, "Quit playing around." He looks out there, and there is like absolutely no one. And he said he just remembered, like, all of a sudden, this very bad stench just poured into the house. And he said it almost made him gag. And he thought, you know, that's really weird. Like, there's no one there. So he closes the door, and they all go into the living room. Well, his brother goes into the kitchen and is in there for about 5 minutes when all of a sudden he comes running out, screaming, crying, and he runs right into his bedroom and jumps on the bed. So Jim goes to check on him and see what's wrong. And when he gets in his brother's room, he can see that, like, he's very frantic and just, you know, upset by something. So Jim sits down on his bed and is like, you know, "Hey, what's going on? Like, why are you crying?" And he couldn't get his little brother to talk about, like, what was going on. He said finally his brother, after about 5-10 minutes, says, "I was in the kitchen and I looked out the window. There was this big, tall, hairy monster, and it was waving at me to come outside." And right as he's telling him that story, Jim said he looked out his brother's window and he sees the shadow of something very large just move. And so he tells his brother, like, get out of the room, and he gets his brothers and sisters and he puts them all into the parents' room. Well, he said right at that moment they could hear stuff like running around the house, and they could hear all this noise outside and banging on the windows and the doors. And he said then it stopped. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he said he hears this frantic banging on the front door. So Jim gets up the courage. He goes to his father's office and he grabs his rifle. He goes to the door, and when he looks out the window, he sees that it's his neighbor. So he opens the door, and the neighbor comes running in and is all frantic and is like, "Where are the kids? Where's everybody? Like, are you guys all right? I'm staying with you till your dad gets back." And Jim was kind of confused, like, why is the neighbor here? Why is he panicking? Well, shortly after this, his father comes home, and his father and the neighbor go into the other room. Jim overhears them talking, and the neighbor is basically saying to the father, like, "I was looking out my window when I seen like several large looking men that weren't human running around your house, and I knew the kids were alone, so I ran over there immediately, and one of these things, whatever it was, it chased me." So Jim's father and the neighbor, they get some rifles and they go outside. They tell the kids to lock themselves in the bedroom. And he said all night long they could hear just, you know, loud bangs and booms, you know, and shots being fired. And he said the next morning his father came in, had this blank stare on his face, and just slowly shuffled onto the couch. And he asked his father, you know, like, "What was that last night? Like, what happened?" And his dad looked at him and said, "I never want to speak about what I seen out there." And he said still to this day, he has no clue what it is that his father seen or what they experienced that night.
A lot of people wonder why they say in the Appalachians not to go into the woods at night, not to whistle, not to sing, and always make sure you close your windows and you lock your doors, and absolutely never respond to anything that calls your name. So this goes back to an old Native American belief in the area that these mountains were home to spirits and that they would come out and wander during the night. And I've heard 2 stories that will give you an idea as to why you should not do these things at night. So there was a man named Jeff. He lived outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And he was told about this spot up in the mountains where there was some good mushrooms, but no one would go to this area because they were very superstitious. So Jeff thinks, I'm going to go to this area and get a good haul, and what do I care? There's no such thing as ghost. So he goes out, he parks his car, he goes into the woods, and he's hunting for several hours. Starts to notice the sun is going down, it's getting dark, it's time to head back to his vehicle. Now, as he's walking through the woods, he all of a sudden hears, Jeff, come here. Come, Jeff. And he hears his name being called. So Jeff knows from legend that if you hear something calling your name, you do not respond. So he just keeps on walking, and all of a sudden, he hears this louder and louder, his name being called. And then he starts hearing screaming coming from deep in the woods. And he hears laughter, and he hears what sounds like people just talking all around him. So he starts walking faster and faster, and he knows the way he came in, but for some reason it feels like the trees are almost moving, and he is going in the wrong direction now. And finally he comes out sort of to this open area, and he sees a man standing out in this field, but he's turned around looking in the opposite direction. So Jeff goes up and approaches this guy and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you know the route back to the highway?" And when this man turns around, Jeff realizes that it's himself, and he's all bloody and bruised, and he's just staring back at him. So Jeff runs as fast as he can for several miles, gets in his car, and drives back home. Later that night, he's awoken to hearing voices inside his room calling out to him, "Jeff, come back, come." And so Jeff never went back into the woods again, mushroom hunting. And the second story I've heard is there was a couple who decided they were going to live in the Appalachian Mountains for a summer. They find this cabin for rent, and they're surprised at how cheap the price is for 6 months. So they rent this cabin, and they go out there and they bring all their stuff to move in. And this guy in a truck, he meets them out there, and he's very nervous. And he tells them, "Hey, at night, you're going to want to lock your doors and close the blinds." And then he gets in his truck and he leaves as fast as he can. So this couple is just in awe of how nice this log cabin is, and the fact that they got it from, this huge steal. So that night they go into their cabin, they make themselves comfortable. It gets dark, and all of a sudden they hear a thump, thump, thump up on the roof. And it sounds like something or someone is walking across the roof. And then they hear banging on the side of the house, and they hear these large booms and creaks and sounds coming all around them from outside. It sounds almost like their house is being invaded. Eventually, the sound dies down and daylight comes. The next day, same thing happens, and for several weeks this goes on. So finally, the husband is fed up, and he says, "You know what, I'm done. We're taking our home back. We're tired of being harassed." So in the middle of the night, when this sounds start happening again, he goes to the window, he opens the curtains, and then he looks out the window, and standing out behind the window is a woman, and she has this pale, long face and white, gray hair going over her shoulders. And he notices she has solid white eyes, and she's just staring at him. And then she points directly at him, and that's when all hell breaks loose. He starts hearing banging on the roof, banging on the sides of the house. The house feels like almost like an earthquake is happening. And then he shuts the blinds, they run into the bathroom, and they hide for the rest of the night. The next day, they decide, we're through with this, and they leave, never to return again.